Sorry, folks. I just want to get the room camera, and hopefully this will work. Okay. I was looking at my co-host, also contributors. So, good morning. I think we have a quorum now. Thank you for your attendance today. Many of you returning from previous ones, but we have some new attendees as well, so you're very welcome. The format of this webinar is I'll speak for about 25-30 minutes, and we'll leave 15 or 20 minutes then afterwards for Q&A if there are a lot of questions. Maximum 45 minutes for the total webinar. Okay. After a brief introduction, I'm going to talk about what the regulators say you should be doing. And the key focus today is on critical or important business services, and what are they and how do you define them? How does the regulator define them? They want you to set the criteria, so you decide what is important, critical. And then the essence of today's is really about capturing that information around those business services. What should you capture and how much? Then once you've, I suppose, identified those that are important, mapping the detail. Now, mapping seems to have two meanings in the documents I've read. Mapping can be just identify and document the information, but mapping also can involve a picture, a map of the process. So we look at that. And then reporting. What sort of stuff should you be reporting? Now, when I did that over the last few days, I realized it's all a bit dry, a lot of words, a bit turgid. So I thought it might be practical and pragmatic to put in a worked example. So if you're still awake once we get through all the words, I have a bit of color and a worked example. Okay. calQrisk. We see ourselves as an organization of professionals very much like yourself, risk and compliance, and we stay on top of things by active memberships in various organizations, so that we can talk to you about the challenges you face and we understand them and with you find a solution. Indeed, we supply a governance, risk and compliance solution which has been evolving over the last 10 years. And it has evolved on the basis of feedback from our customers. People wanted incidents, we added an incident module, we added emissions module, we added a third parties module. Fairly comprehensive platform. And soon to add another module to support resilience. More about that later. We also recently started up a risk advisory service because we found people wanted to formally engage us and give them advice. So we offer that as well. Our application is used by probably close to 4,000 people, certainly on the numbers it looks higher, but organizations and their customers, they're not only their own staff, but also people that they work with have access. So that's us. Resilience is all about being able to overcome the unexpected. I dispensed with the regulator's definition of resilience about being able to deliver critical operations through disruption. They're focused just on the critical, important operations, but I thought resilience, what's an English description of resilience? And as a former hardware engineer, I tried to design resilient systems that would be able to withstand, the unexpected, recover, self-heal, all those good things. But I thought this was a nice, succinct definition. And just by way of explanation, this morning, about an hour ago, we had a bit of a blip that looks like we weren't going to be able to run this webinar today. It was all a bit of a panic, but the swan is sailing serenely on the water. You just can't see the flapping paddles underneath. Okay. I stopped at three. The Central Bank of Ireland, the Financial Conduct Authority and Prudential Regulator in the UK, and Basel. Now, I thought about putting DORA up here, the Digital Operation Resilience Act, which is an act across the European Union, but that's very much focused on IT, and it's not about business services or critical operations. I see there was a question coming in. I'm just going to check on that question. Okay, volume. I hope, yes, I do. I've got my headset on. That might improve the volume. And my apologies. I normally choose this microphone as it's better, so thank you for that tip. Okay. So let's look and see what these three are saying about resilience, and in particular business services. Those of you familiar with the Central Bank of Ireland's graphic and their 15 guidelines on resilience, that's taken from the cross-industry guidance on resilience. And they use the headings, identify, prepare, respond and adapt, recover and learn. Now, I always feel that on the identify and prepare, that this is written as if just expect you're going to be disrupted. But what if you could prevent it in the first place? But then when you look a bit closer at these 15, 6 of them specifically call out critical or important business services. And I realized when I read this in conjunction with the PRA and the Basel guidance, the regulators are only interested in the important or critical operations or critical services you provide in how it affects the consumer. They don't care if you survive, unless, of course, you could bring instability to the market. If you're a big bank, certainly they would be concerned. But I say that with because I'd like to encourage you to identify all of your business services and identify all of the vulnerabilities and address all of the risks, not just the top layer, but more about that in a moment. So yes, the regulator wants you to prove criteria for how you determine what's a critical or important business service, and then identify them, and then determine the impact tolerances. Basically, that's how long do you think, or how long can you afford to be not delivering the service before it impacts the consumers and you. Well, more about that, but you'll see that the focus here is very much on important or critical business services. The Financial Conduct Authority. Now, I like the inclusion of the word prevent, adapt, respond, and recover to and learn from operational disruptions, because I think a big part of it is preventing them in the first place. Isn't that better than having a disaster and responding to it? And then I've just, in bold here, highlight, as I did in the others, they've also called out the important business services. They dropped the word critical, but it's the same idea. Identify them, identify your impact tolerances, document the people, processes, the technologies, the third parties, basically the dependencies. What do you need to deliver these services? Both call for scenario testing. Do you know if your incident response plans to a disruption to a critical service will operate as you think? So you'll see in all of the advice and guidance, it's a recommendation you do scenario exercises. That's where you simulate a disruption and say what you will do in that scenario. And all of them talk about lessons learned. Indeed, I probably have said a dozen times this year, I think it was Eleanor Roosevelt who said, we don't live long enough to make all the mistakes ourselves. Let's learn from others. So when you do a lessons learned from your mistakes, you share them with others, and they do encourage that as well. But certainly learn from your mistakes. The best organizations learn from mistakes. The best organizations don't try to hide mistakes, that don't beat up the person who made the mistake. It's what's called a no blame culture or just culture. And those organizations learn and grow. Tom Watson, the founder of IBM, was once asked, how do I become more successful? And he said, double your failure rate. And by that, of course, he meant that the more you fail, the more you learn, isn't it? Okay, enough about that hobby horse. To Basel. Basel called them critical operations.
not important business services, but critical operations, and becomes clear when you read the Basel one that it's aimed at large banks. Nothing else exists in their mind. But what I take out of this is the same things. It's risk management, it's business continuity, it's mapping the interconnections between your processes, the third parties, incident management. It's all saying this, getting the same message across. So nothing new there. Okay. So let's look at the definitions of what is an important or critical business service. The central bank describe it as a service provided by a firm to an external end user, market participant, where the disruption to the provision of the service could cause material customer detriment, harm market integrity, compromise policyholder protection, or threaten a firm's viability, safety, soundness, or financial stability. I think that's financial stability of the market. That's a lot of not your company impact and a bit of your company, whereas the FCA are more succinct, I think. Services which, if disrupted, could potentially cause intolerable harm to the consumers of the firm's services or risk market integrity. They clearly don't care about your organization, whether you survive or not, but they care about the consumers. They care about the customers that you serve. Basel, their concern is at the higher level, and if you're a significant bank and you should fail and threaten the stability of the banking system. But you get the idea, and there's a message coming across here. This isn't a compliance webinar, but if it was compliance, then I would be saying, focusing on what the regulator requires you to do. But I'm a risk person, and I would say compliance is somebody else's minimum standard. And I would encourage you to, document all of your business services, then identify which ones are critical and which ones could be to the detriment of your customers if you weren't able to deliver them, and so on. So include what you need to do for the regulator in how you manage this. So a little bit deeper now. And sorry for all the words, but I'm copying and pasting from the documents, and I didn't want to abbreviate that. I wanted to give you the full text. The board has to approve the clearly defined criteria for selection of what you'd consider an important or critical business service. And they do this by achieving, considering what a disruption, what the disruption might pose to your customers, the firm's viability, safety, soundness, and to overall financial stability. How do you do this? Well, they suggest an outcomes-based approach. And they don't explain what they mean by that, but outcomes-based approach, I think, is just think what the impact would be if you stopped delivering one of your services. And think if you weren't delivering the service for a week, would there be screaming, shouting in the streets? Would there be people banging on your door? Would the regulator be down on you like a ton of bricks? And if you can say, well, for most of our services, that will be the case after a week, then maybe drop it back to 3 days and then 2 days. And maybe as you reduce that window and you realize that the really important ones are the ones where people start screaming and shouting after 1 day. Now, that's a very simplistic way of approaching it, but the board, you have to define what is critical or important. And I was just trying to explain the outcomes-based approach. Okay, I can't give you the criteria, but the FCA does give, helpfully, about a dozen pieces of information, things you should consider. Again, it's just consider. There's no hard and fast rule here, but considering the nature of the client's base, their ability to obtain service from somebody else, are you the only one? Therefore, if you can't deliver it, they're stuck in some way. I'm not going to go through all of these, but you can see that it gives you enough of ideas, things you should consider. But I think the approach of the outcomes-based approach, if you look at that and what would happen if you didn't deliver the service, you'll be able to document very clearly the impact that not delivering the service will have. Basel, again, I include it just for completeness, but they talk about critical functions and critical operations as defined by the FSB, and is expanded to include activities, processes, and services and the relevant supporting assets, the disruption of which will be material to the continued operation of the bank or its role in the financial system. So clearly it's aimed at banks, and it's aimed at the bank's role in the broader banking system market. So I don't think we have any large banks on the call today, so I'm going to move on. Okay, now it gets a little bit more tangible. If we've agreed that, okay, the focus and the priority on the operational resilience should be on those critical or important business services. And I would say you start by identifying them all, capture a minimum information on all of them, because then that's your starting point. Then you can go through that and ask the question, well, what if, and then try and identify from that full list which is the smaller list. And I'm talking about, you might end up with half a dozen services that are on the critical list. You might deliver 20, but when you look at them in detail, I'm going to say that a smaller proportion are critical. No, that's a business service. I think processes, you will have dozens of processes, and I think that's the next layer down, but more about that. But so describe the service. Maybe you add criticality after you've got all the other information, after you fully understand the business service. Ownership, and ownership in terms of a person and maybe a function in the organization. So you know whose responsibility is it in the first place to deliver this? Who's it for? Where's it delivered from? I mean, I've added in a few columns in my worked example, but you could probably add a few more. And this is the key thing, the dependencies. Because nowadays, most of us rely on third parties or intra-group. If you're a large international, I know many of you have groups within your international organization that will deliver part of the services or some services for you. Identify those, identify the people involved in the delivery, the processes, and that's the definition in the from the regulators, the end-to-end set of activities, which is a good definition, I think. The technology, some is hardware that you might have on premises, some is software or applications that you need, and you'll be surprised how many of them you have in your organization. They'll go into dozens. The information you required to deliver the service. It's not just the systems, but information and the resources you need. You know, do you have dependencies on individuals? You know, and if that individual is on holidays when you have an issue, do things stop? Third parties, definitely if you're not identifying them as part of a dependency on your delivery of a service, there's a big gap there. Now, this is where it gets a bit more difficult, and I can't give you any guidelines except to say you have to decide on what are the acceptable levels of disruption. And who's it acceptable to? Because on the one side, certainly the regulator might think you being down for 3 days is unacceptable. It might be acceptable to you. So when you're answering that, I think you have to think beyond the organization and not just what you might find acceptable, but what the customers might find acceptable. You need to decide on the maximum tolerable outage or maximum tolerable period of disruption, if you wish to call it that. MTO I like for short. And if that's, let's say that's 8 hours for a particular service, then your recovery time objective is going to be less than 8. I would say if I was the IT person in your organization and you told me the maximum tolerable outage for this service is 8 hours, then I would be looking to recover any systems that are needed for that within 4 hours. Why? Because you may not decide exactly at the point of where you lose the service to press the button and tell me to do the recovery. You may wait an hour or two, in which case I'm now under the cosh. So I will always, and I have done this, always set my standard at half the MTO, but that's me. There's no hard and fast rule. And the recovery point objective, the RPO, is basically how much information can you afford to lose? So if we recover back, if you're out for 8 hours, and I say we're going back to last night's backup, then you've lost everything you've put in today. You might say not acceptable. If the service is disrupted, I don't want to lose more than 1 minute of information. That's possible as well, and it costs, but you need to decide that. So these are impact tolerance metrics. They're key things that will determine the strategy for recovery as well. But don't forget the other things, the non-system stuff, the number of customers affected, the number of transactions affected, the number of, maybe it's the transaction value. You might set other metrics in there that have nothing to do with systems, a system downtime. Your businesses are too different for me to say anything, but you will know these metrics and you need to set these, and then you need to test through scenario exercises and see, can you stay within your own metric, your own tolerances. You have to consider the risks to each of these business services. Isn't that what your risk management is all about? But in your overarching risk register, you will have identified some risks. Well, link them to the business services, link them to, so that you can be confident that the risks that threaten maybe a disruption in the first place are well managed. I still think that half the effort has to go into preventing a disruption in the first place. And so risk management is fundamental to identifying what can go wrong and then taking steps to improve the controls, strengthen the controls. Now, I think depending on your interpretation of the word mapping, I think if I take the broadest, it starts when you start identifying the business services, identifying and documenting them. Mapping is used by the regulators, but not originally. I thought it was mapping as in you can see here a graphic of a process map of the individual steps in a process. But it's more than that. It's capturing the information, as we will see in a moment. But it's at a level, and this is, the bank isn't telling you how much detail, just that you should do it at a level that gives you the ability to identify the vulnerabilities and the resources. I think you will know. I can give you a lot of suggestions, but it's have enough detail so you know what the vulnerabilities are. If you know what the vulnerabilities are and the risks are something exploiting those vulnerabilities or those leading to events that lead to a disruption. Certainly you need to, if you have third parties involved in a business service, consider them as an extension of your organization, and you need to understand the people, process and technology that they're dependent on to deliver the service to you in the first place. And reporting. And the board or governing body must, and this is absolutely essential for this, must review and approve the documentation, must be able to demonstrate a keen understanding. And again, I've copied and pasted these words from the regulators, because when the regulator comes visiting, it'll be the board and representatives from the board they'll speak to, and they want to hear that the board collectively certainly have an understanding as to what are the critical or important business services. So they need to be well informed. If you went a whole year without doing a scenario exercise, how do you know your plans to cope with the disruption are going to work? Again, the regulator would ask you, but you should be asking yourselves. I say again, the regulator is the minimum standard, and you should be setting a standard higher than that. Goes back to the old risk management activities as well. Are the controls working effectively? If you had incidents, and by incidents, I'm going to say, let's say small incidents that was a disruption briefly, understand it. What went wrong? Did the control fail? What can you do to improve it? Again, it's not to beat up anybody, but it's to learn from that mistake. And indeed, it's interesting that in operational resilience, everywhere, any article I read, it's always included that lessons learned. And you can do this post-incidents, and you can do it post-exercises. Anything that tells you this isn't working exactly the way we thought is an opportunity to learn and make it better, and have that attitude. I mean, it's the old plan, do, check, act. And if you don't check, and don't improve, then you're going to still be offering a poor service and liable to disruption in 2 years' time. So constantly be striving to make it better. Okay, I hope you can read this. I could have added a few more columns, but I wanted to give you a sample. And I thought, where would I look to samples of services without putting any customers' information up here? That would be customer information that would let me put it up here, shared with me. Some have, but I wouldn't use that. So I went back to one of my roots, which was I used to manage a call center, and we delivered services. So not quite complete, this diagram, but enough that you get the idea that if you look at the services you deliver, this was information delivery, technical support, warranty registration, with 3 of about 15 or 20 services we offered and were paid to deliver by different clients. Describe the service, who owns it, and again, I would say the owner is both a person and a function or department. I think function is probably better. Your MTO, your RTO, that's the maximum tolerable outage, recovery time objective, the criticality. And you can see here that the technical support, the maximum tolerable outage is 4 hours. That's the shortest in all of these. And we said, this is critical. If we're not delivering the tech support, for more than 4 hours, there's going to be some serious knock-on effect. One of our customers back then was giving support for people who are operating cash registers. And you can imagine if you've got a queue of people wanting to pay or check out of a hotel or whatever, and you can't operate, it gets kind of loud fairly quickly. The people, process, technology, the dependencies to deliver the service, document who, what teams, what individuals, you'll know better, are involved in the delivery of this, what processes. And this is what gets down to the next level, and we'll look at that in terms of detail. Do I need to go to the next level? The technology, that if I had to recover this, I mean, a lot of this information you will have hopefully in your business impact analysis that you've done. You'll have identified these dependencies and the technology, and indeed the priority will be set, the priority for recovery will be set by the maximum tolerable outage primarily, and RTO. Technology, the facilities. Facilities is kind of a collective name. I would say it's both things like utilities as well as facilities, like the internet, the telephone system, and maybe that goes under technology, but that's up to you. And location, and as I said, I could have added another few. If I work down then detail on that, if I just pick the technical support one, because that I'd identified as critical, then I've got to know and understand the risks. And I think the risks are probably already in the overarching risk register, but I've got to view them now from the perspective of a particular service. The third parties involved, and the third parties, I haven't put everything in here, but you'll start with a contract. Do you have a contract with this third party? Do you have a service level agreement? What happens if, and I think I've personally been in this experience, if the disruption that you have is also felt by the third party and by other customers of the third party, who gets priority? Where do you stand? And then drilling down to the next level, the processes that collectively, from the end-to-end activities to deliver the service. And I've just picked a simple one here, case recording and then case escalation. And when you escalate a case, as we did back in those days when we did this, we escalated to a third party who was outside of our control. but we still had to manage the process. That might be where you will resort to mapping it out step by step. And if I could encourage you to do this, because I have found, I've been doing these for many years, documenting it step by step is a great way of establishing, have you got all the steps? Have you got some gaps? Even if you didn't look at it for another year, the actual task of mapping out each individual step will make it better. And then here again, the owner of those individual processes and the importance, and I'm picking this up from the regulators. They want to see that you're focusing in on this, and where they're important or critical, that you're understanding them better. So I hope that helps. Just a bit on the reporting. Well, the list of business services, obviously, a list is a list. Scenario exercises. We'll probably do a lunchtime learning on that again sometime. You know, what's in it, what are the learnings, actions to take from it, lessons learned. Now, I got an image here of a third-party risk register, but that could equally be risks associated with business services. Things like monitoring that controls are working, monitoring the performance of the service, looking for any trends, negative trends. You have to have fingers on the pulse and know if this is getting better or getting worse. And I would say reporting with a bit of color, a bit of graphics will give you that feeling. Okay, I'm going to finish on this. I've just gone over the 30 minutes, but we still have 12 minutes for Q&A. The focus certainly on the critical or important business services, but I would say to do the full list, and certainly for the regulator, you focus on what's important. You define what's important. And you need to have, it doesn't have to be complicated criteria, but there could be just a couple of metrics that if breached, this would determine this is an important or critical service for you. Yeah, identify all of them. Determine acceptable impact tolerances. Because when you do an exercise, you have to see, can you stay within those impact tolerance metrics? And if they're not budging and you're not able to stay within them, it might require an additional spend, and the authorization from that will come from the board. And if they're not fully informed as to what's important and critical and not involved in this whole process, you'll have difficulty getting that approved, I'd imagine. Identify and document the dependencies goes without saying anymore. I think you understand that at this stage. And map at a level of detail that enables identification of the resources. You know, if it's a really critical one, as I said, go down to the next level until you are confident you've identified all of the steps and areas where it could actually break, because it only takes one link in the chain for the whole service perhaps to come to a halt. And finally, just make sure the board understand and approve what you're doing. So thank you. Thank you for your attendance and for listening. And I know we have a few questions. I'm going to do one slight advertisement here. Chris is going to be giving a demo tomorrow week at the same time, 10:30, on our solution for the operational resilience and including the process mapping. I'm going to look at some questions here now. Okay, will you be sharing the slides after the call? Yes, we will be sharing the slides, Michael. And the recording will be available as well. If you know people who want to hear it back, who couldn't make it. For impact tolerances, you've used RTO, MTO, and RPO. Does the framework require another impact tolerance column? Probably is the answer. I used RTO, MTO, and RPO because you probably have them already from your business impact analysis. But I think depending on your business, you should look at the other metrics. I was trying to, I suppose, look at how many customers affected. I mean, if you have a disruption and it affects 1% of your customers, is that a disruption you're concerned about? No, if you're that one customer, yes. But you might say a disruption that impacts more than X% of our customers for more than 2 hours is totally unacceptable. You know, a smaller number of customers for a longer time might be acceptable. Bigger number of customers, less time. Nobody can tell you what that exact metric is. You will know from your business. It may be value. I mean, if I'd imagine in Amazon, if they had a disruption that caused them not to receive orders for an hour, the experts tell me that's revenue they will never get back again. If yeah, it's hard to think. You think, well, I'll wait an hour and I'll order it then. But apparently not. Apparently that revenue is gone. So you might equate time with money and value. Look, you will know your business better than anybody from the outside. But the regulators, if we're talking about compliance, they will want you to be able to tell them what your criteria is, and I suppose the logic for choosing it. Remember, their perspective is they want to protect the consumer and the greater market stability in your market. You want to protect your company and your revenues, I'm sure. So it'll probably be a mix of both, I'd imagine. Michael, Tracy, should the matrix also include those from EBA PSD2 guidelines on incident reporting, or will your module include same? European Banking Authority, I had to look at that as well. I mean, it's the short answer, Tracy, is yes. I see it's on incident reporting. Yeah, it's probably a little bit off the topic. Well, no, it's not. Apologies. Incident reporting, because it's about lessons learned. When an incident is critical, I think what Tracy is alluding to here is you may have an obligation to report that to the regulator if it has been a serious incident. And I think for those, additional information must be reported. If that's what you're alluding to, Tracy, and I think you are, I can tell you that, yeah, we have decided that in a future release, there's probably an additional dozen fields, probably custom fields, that allow people to record additional information in an incident. We have about 40 fields today, but I've seen the template that the regulators issued for critical incident reporting, and it's yeah, it's mind blowing. It's a very busy Excel spreadsheet, but no, this solution that we're launching next week is more about I suppose mapping the business services, mapping the dependencies and the process maps on them, and linking to the risks and linking to the third parties. The incidents that'll be in a future release. Okay, I'll just see if there's any more. Okay, I think that was this. Those are just comments. I think that's it, folks. Okay, well, thank you for your attendance and thank you for your questions. I hope you got something from it. It's it is one of the bits of the Operational Resilience series we've been doing, and hopefully that focus on business services was of value today. Thank you for your time, and again, if you're around tomorrow week, don't miss the online demo on Wednesday of next week.